Welcome to the Your Life, Your Voice YouTube channel. Proudly brought to you by the Diversity and Disability Program at the Migrant Resource Centre, Northwest Region, where South Africans, organisations and the community interested in culturally and linguistically diverse and the disability sector get together.
The Diversity and Disability Program would like to acknowledge the Wurrung and Bunurong peoples of the Kulin Nation, the traditional owners of the land on which we work and live. We recognise their continued connection to land, water and the community. We pay our respects to elders past and present.
Nothing about us without us. We pay our respects to all South Africans who have worked tirelessly over many years for the right to live in a community and for equality and human rights for all.
This channel is for all those seeking to understand more about disability culture and community, to hear and learn from leaders and peers with disability, and to improve our individual advocacy skills.
This channel also aims to provide useful information about organisations and supports so that we can all live a better life in this world.
Nothing about us without us.
Every interview is unique as you and I. Your life, your voice. Be the voice of change in your life. Good morning and welcome to another edition of Your Life, Your Voice. I'd like to welcome back Larissa McFarlane as my co-host. Hi, Larissa. How are you doing?
Hello. Yes, it's been a little while since I've been here. I've missed you, but I have been away trying to deal with headachy things. So yes, I'm still with a headache today, but I'm still great to be here.
Right. And today we have Alison. And I'll just ask Alison to do just a brief introduction. Hey, Alison, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well. So my name is Alison. I'm a 38-year-old disabled Black woman. I'm an expat from the United States. I moved here to Australia about 13 years ago. And I've been active in the disability community for now almost 4 years, although I've been disabled for some time.
Right. How about we kick off with some questions? I'd like to welcome Larissa's cat also today. This is also a very welcome member of our community. Alison, can you tell us a little bit about your background, please?
So as I said, I originally came here from the United States. I married my wife 13 years ago. Currently divorced. I have been disabled my entire life since I was born. I was actually born prematurely and stayed into the hospital for several months before I was able to come home. So I've always had some degree of disability. I had asthma and seizures through most of my childhood. I had leukemia when I was a teen going into my adulthood. And I had originally thought that things were getting better. I had sort of grown out of the seizures and my asthma was controlled. And then around 2015, I started passing out. And that's when I found out that I had POTS. The POTS diagnosis led to a few other things. I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, something that I had no idea about up until recently. It just wasn't something that popped up. I also have central sensitization. COPD, because I have lung damage from several untreated lung infections that I was told was a flu, and it turned out that I had severe lung damage from that. And I am currently an ambulatory wheelchair user as well because my Ehlers-Danlos has progressed to the point where I need that.
Right.
Can you, for our listeners, could you just describe what is an ambulatory wheelchair user?
So I have a wheelchair, not because I can't walk, but because it is better for me not to walk. So I found myself in a cycle where I felt like if I could do something, I should do something. And then through a lot of interacting with people in the disability community, talking to my physiotherapist, meeting other people with the disability, I realized that it was time to sort of stop trying to push through and accepting my own internal ableism and I started using the wheelchair. And what I found is that the wheelchair has basically opened up my life. I went from being in the house all the time to being free to go out as I please. So I can walk. I most of the time do not walk unless it's absolutely necessary.
Okay, yeah, it's a really there's so many different ways that we use wheelchairs, and lots of people who don't use them don't realize that there are different ways to do it. Yeah.
It's people every time that I stand up in the supermarket, or if I get up, they think that I can't walk. And then the question inevitably becomes, if you can walk, why don't you walk? Like, that's lazy. Or when I say that I'm doing better, the question is, oh, so you won't need your wheelchair anymore. And I'm like, no, that the goal is never to get out of my wheelchair. My wheelchair is a tool. If I get stronger and I can walk more, that's great, but it's never going to be to get out of my wheelchair. It's just going to be to give me another option.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a great, I once had a great conversation with Naomi Cheney, disability activist, around, she was trialing using a wheelchair. She lives with chronic fatigue, ME. And she talked about how, well, there's all these gadgets we have in the kitchen, like we have a microwave to make cooking easier, and we have, a whizzy thing instead of beating your egg. And at no time do we ever say, oh, no, that's lazy. You shouldn't use that beating thing. You should do everything by hand. And yet, for some reason, when it comes to disability equipment, there's this sort of feeling that, no, we're giving up if we use some sort of disability equipment, rather than going, actually, this is just making life better and easier.
And I actually think some of the stuff that we use could be helpful to people who don't have disabilities. Like if you're in a theme park, I don't know why it's a problem to use a wheelchair. People get tired. And I also find that I can enjoy things a lot more. For example, going to the zoo, because halfway through I'm not tired or sore or in pain. I'm just enjoying the zoo experience for what it is. So I tell people all the time, like, I see nothing wrong with using a wheelchair. Occasionally when I want to stretch my legs, my ex-partner would sit in my wheelchair and roll behind me. And she's like, I love this thing.
Cool. Yeah. Yes, I actually also live with EDS and a type of POTS. So at some point in the future, Alison, we should have another conversation, more private maybe, about and share notes about our conditions, because they are considered rare in the medical scene. But in actual fact, EDS and POTS are not rare. They are actually really common. There's types of EDS that are rare, but the most common one, HEDS, is very common. But unfortunately, it means that the average, I think, time it takes to get diagnosed with EDS in Australia is over 10 years from when you first start. For me, it was 15 from when I knew I had it to try and finally getting someone to agree, because there's, this attitude that it can't exist.
I was diagnosed pretty quickly, and I feel like some of that is due to privilege and some of that is just due to blind luck. But I used to live regional, and I didn't realize at the time that standing was causing my POTS trigger. So I was sitting on the bench waiting for the train, and the train line that I was getting on at, you can actually see it at the previous station because it's a straight view, but in the distance. So I could see that it was coming, and I knew that if I wanted to get a seat, I needed to get to the front. So I jumped up and walked up to the line. And as I was walking up to the line, I started passing out. And when I was passing out towards the train tracks, like I was falling on the tracks. A person behind me grabbed my backpack and pulled me down. And he stayed with me until the ambulance came and basically said it looked like she fainted, because a few people were concerned that I was suicidal. When the ambulance came, they passed that information on to the hospital. But of course, as you know how hospitals are, they don't listen to us. For some reason, Chinese whispers, I'm not sure how this got to where it became, but it became a situation where they decided that I needed to be sectioned and held on a mental health thing. So my then wife was not very happy at how this went and kicked up a stink. And finally, they had to start investigating a few different things. And they were able to see that when I stood up, because I was connected to machines, that my blood pressure tanked. So I got the POTS diagnosis first and was sent to Sue Corcoran, who is an amazing doctor here in Melbourne. She's the one that put 2 and 2 together with regards to EDS, because she figured that it's a comorbid. And I had always been told I was hypermobile. And that's when she was like, okay, let's also investigate this because you can barely stand up. At that point, I was on a walking frame and very unbalanced. And so she sort of pushed things. I think from the time that I heard the word EDS to the proper diagnosis was about 4 years. And a lot of that was because of the genetics team getting an appointment there for the diagnosis. But my doctors, my GP, my physiotherapist, and the rheumatologist were pretty confident it was EDS.
Still sounds like a really difficult journey, but I'm really pleased that you managed to get there more quickly than most people. Yeah. So, I'm interested because you came to Australia in 2015, and I know that the system, the world, the scene, the disability scene, particularly, is so different between Australia and the US. But before we get onto that, or if you want to leap in there, when did you start identifying as disabled or living with disability?
I actually came in 2010, so I got sick in 2015. In terms of when I started acknowledging that I was disabled, I want to say it was about 2019, or actually, you know what? I would say 2017. That's when I started acknowledging that there was a serious problem. I wasn't as out and an advocate, but I knew that things needed to change. I was working in health insurance at that time, and I had to take a job that would allow me to work from home purely because I just couldn't do it anymore. And I think that that was the first time that I had really genuinely acknowledged that I now have a disability. Like there's this, I'm just not going to be able to keep doing it. Even when I had cancer as a teen, it was sort of like I was working and going to school. It was like it was a pause with cancer. And because with cancer, you have sort of a plan, everything felt very temporary. With POTS EDS, that was not temporary. It was just, I wasn't getting answers. And at that point in time, I hadn't had clear answers about what was going to be done. They couldn't tell me if I was going to be cured. We were trying all kinds of different medications at that time. Sometimes things would work and sometimes things didn't work. So that was probably in 2017, the first time that I said, this is probably going to be something that I'm going to have to deal with for at least a good period of time. It would have been around 2019, 2020, when I really sat down and said, you know, I'm disabled. And I acknowledge that this is who I am. It's not something to be ashamed about. I come from a culture where strength and, you know, working through adversity is something to be proud of, a proud Black woman, a strong Black woman. And so the idea of giving in was very difficult for a long time. It felt like I was giving up. And it wasn't until COVID happened that I saw how fast the world shifted to accommodate COVID. Like I had been asking to work from home at existing jobs for years. I'd been asking for classes to be put online. I started my law degree in 2015, and due to health, it just wasn't something. Like I kept having to stop, take a year off, 2 years off, try and go back because it just wasn't working the way that I needed it to work. And then COVID happened and the world changed. And there was no questions asked. And I mean, if you were in Melbourne, it was within sometimes hours that people, when we got the notice that you had to work from home, there were people being handed computers, desktop computers, and they figured something out. But when I had asked before, it was like, no, you can't have this. And even with doctor's letters and acknowledging that there was a disability there, they just wouldn't. So when COVID happened, that's when I sort of started getting mad and started getting more involved in advocacy and saying, you know, this is something that, this is my life, this is a life that I have, and I need to fight to make it more sustainable.
So I guess in some ways, COVID has brought out your life as a disability advocate.
Yeah, I've always advocated for myself. So advocacy is not something new to me, but it's always been around like being an LGBT person, a Black person, a woman. My disability wasn't something that I thought I needed to advocate around, except for a few brief things when I had cancer. There were a few teachers that didn't think that I belonged in school with cancer. But otherwise, I didn't feel like it was something that I needed to advocate for. And in fact, I actually learned something about myself during COVID. I always assumed that if my disability got to the point where I needed the help, that then I could ask. I thought that the disability acts that we had and the laws and things like that, if you have a disability, you're fine. If you need it, just ask. And I think that that's a common misconception that abled people think, that if we need help or we get everything that we ask or we need, and then I finally needed to ask for an accommodation with school. And I figured, I'm the ideal disabled person. I'm that disabled person that able people love to point out. Look at what she's doing. She's working and she's going to school and she's doing all the things. She doesn't let her disability get her down. So when I went and asked, I thought that they would look at me and think, well, she's really only asking because she has no choice. And I was declined. And that's when it hit me. Like, I've done all the things that they've asked of me. What is happening to people who aren't able to do the things that they've asked of them? Like, I've done everything you able people have told me that I should do as a disabled person. And you still told me no. So if I can't get the help, what's happening to these other people?
That's such a really great point and such a great insight. Particularly, coming from someone who sees the world from a sort of not blah words, from so being more newly identifying. So you've got like a really clear perspective on seeing the world through able-bodied eyes, even though you have been disabled in many ways throughout your life. To notice that's it's something to really remember, because it's true. So many people are so hidden and have so few rights, and I have to say, some people give up. We just get hidden, especially when our illnesses are so invisible and exhausting. Taking a step back, when did you connect with the disability community, or is that something you've always been connected through your life?
So I've always been connected with the disability community in some way, because, like, for example, asthma, I've been in Facebook groups for people with asthma. The first time I think I actively connected was when I had leukemia this is like way back when, because I'm a lot older than I look. But I don't know if you guys remember AOL chat rooms. When I had leukemia, there were AOL chat rooms. This might be a very American thing, but it's similar to like Yahoo chat rooms, very old forum type chat rooms. And I found a cancer survivors chat room, and I was the youngest person there because it was filled with a lot of older breast cancer survivors. But it was like the first place that I was able to have conversations and realize that conversations are different when you have a disability or an illness. Like, we could have fun with our illnesses a little bit. We would make jokes about certain medications. Like, we had this one medication we called the Red Devil, and we would like make jokes about the outcome of that. I'm not going to say what the outcome of that is, but it does have a funny effect. In any case, we would like have fun, and it was sort of like interesting to me to have a conversation with people that understood the jokes, and that sometimes you had to add a little bit of humor into it. Then the same thing with the asthma ones. Like, it was where I would find the cute little covers to cover my asthma pump, or information on newest nebulizers that came out, things that made life easier, exercises. So I've always been connected in that way, just as a knowledge base and sharing knowledge. But in terms of advocacy, it was when I was declined by the school, the help that I needed. I actually went to the Human Rights Council here in Melbourne, and I started looking for assistance, and that's how I came into the DRC.
Yes. Okay. So the DRC is the Disability Resources Centre for our audience. It's one of, I'm not sure, but I think it's Victoria's oldest disability-led advocacy grassroots advocacy campaigning organisation, set up by Leslie Hall, who might be familiar, and other people, but she might be familiar to some of our audiences because I've spoken about her lots. And one of the few disability-led organisations. So you made a good choice going there. Did you know that you were, did you research before you went there?
No, I honestly started emailing. I emailed maybe about 20 people, but the DRC was the one that sort of made me feel comfortable. And then I was invited to belong as well when I started explaining how I felt about education, because again, this is a cultural thing, but in my culture, education is very important, because I grew up very poor in a very, very economically depressed and educationally depressed area. And so for me, education was the thing that got me out of that. It was what allowed me to see different parts of the world, travel, and get out of poverty. And so I felt a type of way because we talk about disability and we talk about, the disability tax and how so many of us are in poverty. And the fact that they're being declined education because of a disability just didn't sit well for me. Like, you can't complain about the cost of disability or the cost of the NDIS and whatnot, but not help them help themselves. Like, you have to help us help ourselves. And they create all of these roadblocks and barriers, but then also these nonsensical ways to fix things when they could just fix the existing system with a simple, result. Like, if they spoke to us, we could explain to them, you don't need to do all this. We don't need these employment centers. We need the employers to actually make work sustainable. We don't need special education groups. We need the education providers to make it sustainable and accessible. But they'll spend, several $1,000,000 on a disability employment service that doesn't address the fact that a lot of employers are not sustainable and they're not accessible. They might have like moments where they'll allow you to have access, but then you'll come against a brick wall and they're not willing to do anything more than what they've done to initially get you into that role. And also I find that a lot of employers don't know what they can do or should do. There's very little information for them, and they don't know what's an access need, or some of them, I get the vibe that they feel like, you're trying to get over on them or cheat your way through school if you have an access need. And I think that part of the problem is because there's very little explanation about how our disability impacts us and why we need these access requests.
I have so many questions, and I don't know where to start. I'm going to start with, you mentioned the disability tax. That's not a super well-known term. I'm thinking it's more of a US term. But it might not be. I mean, it's not something really present in but I know it's obviously an internet thing.
Happy to explain it. The disability tax is the cost of being disabled. Yeah. So I'll use myself as an example. I have a relatively good job and I make relatively good money, but I do not have the money to go on vacations like some of my friends do. Most of my friends in my field with no children, they're going on vacations, they're spending money on the weekends. And the reason that I don't have this money is because excess money that I have tends to go on my disability. So the cost of being disabled is quite high. I have to pay for specialists. I have to pay for physiotherapy. I have to pay for special foods because I can't eat certain things. I also have MCAS, which is mast cell activation disorder, which means that my immune system is hypersensitive to histamines in food. That basically means that I can't eat leftovers unless they're prepared a certain way. I'm also allergic to a lot of pollens, not vegetables, but chemical compounds in fruits and vegetables. So I can eat like the inside of a mango, for example, but I can't eat the outside of a mango or too close to the pip. I can eat pineapple if it's cooked. So there's so many little things that I have to do for my disability, and there's nothing to accommodate that in terms of financial. Like, I don't get paid more because I'm disabled. I get paid the exact same amount as someone who is in the same situation as me, but without a disability. So the cost of disability is quite high. Even in Australia, which is surprising because a lot of people from back home, they think everything in Australia is paid for because we have universal healthcare. And I'm like, absolutely not. I've gone to a doctor where he's electrocuted me, and that cost me $400. I went to a sleep study and that was $700. But again, a lot of that comes down to the privilege because I have a job that allows me to afford this stuff. People who can't, it's even worse for them because, especially if you're on disability, you're expected to pay the exact same as I do with a full-time job on the disability payments, which are admittedly more higher than if you are enabled and on Centrelink, but not enough. It's not very much from what I understand.
No, it's only it is a couple of $100 more, which it makes a big difference because the rate is so low. But yes, it's still very low. It's below the poverty line.
Yeah.
Way below the poverty line. And yes, those expenses are huge. And if you can't afford those expenses, you can end up on public wait lists, which are years and years and years long. I'm currently on wait lists which are many years long. And I'm also on private wait lists as well, expensive ones, but they've still got quite a lot of wait time as well. Yeah, no, there is a massive a massive cost to living with disability that's very invisible and that we don't really talk about. Like, I think about it a lot, but I don't actually talk about it that much. I think we, I don't know. we,
Hard because I find a bit of a struggle because I feel like complaining about it is wrong for me because I'm so privileged to have the financial situation that I have. I also have a family here in Australia. Even though I'm now no longer with my partner, she's still very much my best friend and the person that supports me. Her family still treats me like family. While we were together, you know, I have a whole support system that helps me. And then again, this is things that people are not understanding. When you see disabled people who are doing really, really well, the ones that they point out and say, well, look at what this person's able to achieve in spite of their disability, they never bother to actually look at what's going on in the background. I would argue that almost every single person who's a high achieving disabled person has that family support system. They have an educational background that allows them to work a job that accommodates their disability. They have so many little things. And I think, again, this is stuff that we need to talk about publicly because the public is the one that they inform policy. And part of the problem with a lot of these government policies is they come up against public outrage. You know, the whole idea that people on the NDIS are going on buying yachts and, you know, going on fun vacations. And the reality is, no, they're fighting for every little thing that they get. And it's such a difficult situation. The NDIS does bridge the gap, but not for everybody. There's a lot of people who do not qualify for it, and they're still paying the tax.
Our manager, Alison, just on your comment about background, our manager, Christian historian, has severe cerebral palsy physically, and we talk about it quite openly about the support that he has had in his life, which it's phenomenal. It's so good. So basically, his family moved country to support him, to get him the best education possible and treatment. That's a huge support system. And I know other people, you know, who have had similar supports. Yes, so and like a lot of people, disabled people, that support is not there. I mean, I come from a very privileged cold background, and even though my family were privileged, I wasn't privileged. I was the poor sister, you know, and I won't go a lot into it, but there was no financial support for anything really, and sometimes because of time factors, priorities. The priority was to nurture the family business and to get money, get lots and lots of money, but not to like disperse that money equally to people that needed it, you know, namely me. And you know, so yes, so I think that when we're looking at privilege and background and pointing out, well, they're doing okay, you know, it's a really important message. And you know, I've always wanted to go on to higher education, but you know, as my manager says, Jewel, I know you're disappointed that you didn't get the opportunity, but your life has been your life is so amazing, and like you've done so many things. It's equivalent to a PhD, you know, and yes, so I look on his comments, and he's a very, very, very thoughtful and honest, and he's an amazing advocate. So coming from him, it meant a lot because yes, so also so it's a good point in not pointing out to people who are disabled that how well they're doing. Why can't you do any better?
Absolutely. Yeah. because we all are born with different levels of privilege and access, and sometimes it's got nothing to do with us. It's to do with our family or the country we're born in, or so many just issues of luck, and that's what enables you to maybe access education. I want to come back to the education, Alison, and find out where that's at, and also just to say, as Julie said, education is such a big issue and a big problem. A lot of issues accessing education when you're disabled, and that was something that I experienced too. So I have another unfinished degree because the situation, the campus was refused to address some of the ableism and access that was there. But I chose to leave and forge my own path. What were some of the barriers that you faced with your education, and how is that going today?
So for me, it was the disruption because of my health issues. So as you know, with EDS is a collagen disorder and it's all over your body. And because of that, it manifests in some very interesting ways. So I was always having like random hospital visits where I'd need to go into the hospital because I've dislocated something, or my stomach would stop working, or there was a ton of just different things that would happen. So the traditional 4 units over a semester just wasn't really working for me. That was a huge barrier. I originally started with UNE, which I have no problems with. UNE offers an amazing
UNE?
University of New England. It's an online university, and I actually think that it's a really good option for people with disabilities who can't access campuses. Really, really good. But part of the problem with that was that it's just traditional. Sometimes I would only finish 1 class per semester, which means that I'd finish 3 classes a year, and I would have taken me 10, 15 years to get a degree at that rate. The second barrier was COVID, because then I found a university during COVID, surprisingly, that actually worked really well. So Victoria University they use something called the block model. It's 1 class over a 4-week period. And I think that it is the most accessible setup that I have ever seen, in many ways. For one, if you're neurodivergent and you're struggling with bouncing from subject to subject to subject, because usually traditionally you do 4 subjects at a time, maybe 2 if you're doing part-time, but that can sometimes be very confusing. This way I only have 1 class to focus on, and I love it because I can get ahead. When I start reading that textbook, I don't read just that unit chapter and, put it down and then start on the next class. Sometimes I will finish that whole textbook in a few days before class starts, because it's natural to read like you read a book. I find it very unnatural, to be honest with you, the way that you study, because you're meant to read a chapter here and a chapter there, and I'm able to just go through it and just read. So that's one thing that I really, really enjoyed about it. But also the fact that if I get sick and I need to drop one of the blocks, there's 4 other blocks within that semesters. I average between 2 to 3, even 4, during some good periods, classes per semester that I've actually finished. So in the last almost 2 years, I'm almost done that degree, whereas it took me, I started in 2015 in UNE, tried Deakin, came back to UNE, and it just was not working because of that setup. Now, I know that that's not viable for everybody, but I really do like that block model for many reasons. The problem is that VU, once COVID ended, decided to bring things back into person, and that's where my fight started, is because I was not going to be in no classroom with a bunch of people during the COVID period. I had managed up until May of this year to not get COVID at all. And so I was really worried about catching COVID, considering I have COPD. It was even more important to me because it takes a long time for me to recover from things. I actually had to take from May until I tried my first block in October. So from May till October, I had to take off of school because of COVID. And that's with multiple vaccines, antivirals, prednisone, steroids. Like, I had the best treatment I think that I could have possibly had. And there's some people that say, like, don't you feel like you wasted all that time staying in the house and staying away from people? You still got COVID anyway. And I'm like, no, actually, because by the time I did get COVID, we had hindsight, a lot of hindsight. There were people that were dying from COPD in the early days of COVID. by the time it actually happened, I was able to stay home. The original plan back in 2020 when COVID happened was for me to be immediately hospitalized. Because of all the information that we had and all the drugs that we had and then the vaccine, by the time it was managed, like my doctor called me the day I found out, I sent him an email. He called me back immediately. I had antivirals within the hour of knowing that I was positive. Because they had already had a plan for this. And I'm like, this is why a lot of us disabled people fought to not get COVID, because there was not enough information. And we already live with very unpredictable illnesses. You add in an unpredictable virus, and we just knew that things were not going to go well for us. And so now we're getting that information at hindsight and all the medication that we have. And now it wasn't good. I mean, it still took me 4 months to sort of be up and walking. But I didn't feel like I was dying at any point. I felt like I was very well managed.
Yeah, great. I'm so pleased to hear that you are at this stage now. Not that you had a terrible time with COVID, but yeah, it is really common and not talked about enough, and especially the whole long COVID. Anyway, going back to your education, so you obviously haven't been studying this year or between May and today because of COVID.
I did one block in October, which I think it was too soon. I finished it and did well, but it was a struggle. So I'm taking off this block and then the summer block, and then I'll reevaluate in January with how I feel. But I think that it was just a little bit too soon with me working full time as well.
So the issue that you were having with the university was around them removing online access and making you attend in person. Where is that now?
Actually, so the news picked it up. And when I ended up in the news, I think that sort of scared them a little bit. And a few people reached out to me, including the head of the college, who is great. She's actually lovely, and helped me be able to take classes online. So I think that was something she was already looking at in general. And it just was sort of an idea. Whereas when I came out with the news article, it was like, okay, wait, there's more than just, working people that could use this. So there's still not as many classes online as they could be. Like the class that I just took should have been a class that I took in my first year, but because it wasn't offered online, I didn't. I've taken higher level classes, so I had to go back to a 100 level class from a 300 level class just to finish it because it's finally online. But it's still possible for me to finish this law degree completely online now. It's just a little bit of wiggling.
Well done. Well done to you for stepping up and fighting and going public and going to the news. And whilst it doesn't sound like it's perfect, it does sound like, your activism, your raising your voice there made a difference.
It did. It's not perfect, no, but ideally I would like to see them have at least a component of their entire offerings online. I would love to see them branch out into an online university, largely because while I'm in Victoria and can take advantage of this offering that they have, there's people disabled all over Australia that could benefit from this. And I think that it would be very helpful. And not just the disabled people. I sometimes think that we separate ourselves off a little bit too much. We should be banding together with the people who are working, because this stuff would be useful for them. Parents, it would be useful for them. Older people going into university, they might not have the ability to do 4 university classes at one time. They're wanting to ease their way into it. Non-traditional students, they'll accept them, but maybe 1 class, maybe 2 classes might be a little bit easier than the traditional way. So I just think that there's a lot of things that VU could be doing, and there's a lot of opportunities that they're missing.
Really good point. So that brings me to your insight into how different the US is compared to Australia, particularly around disability, culture, community, ideas, etc. Do you have some insight into that?
I think that the disability community in America is much more cohesive. One of the struggles that I find here is that we're all over the place and we are not centralized. We don't have groups of people together. I know more disability activists from America than I do from Australia because we don't have a place to meet. We, in Twitter, for example, all the the advocates from America, particularly the Black ones, they know each other. They talk to each other. We make plans together. You know, we do things together. Here, it's very insular, and there's pockets of activism, but there's no sort of community. And I would love to see that community here, because I think that that's part of the problem. We don't have the numbers in force to say, look, we are all here. This is the problem. We need it to be fixed. Also, we're lacking in terms of an infrastructure for, like, we don't have plans for the future. Like, we're not sitting here saying, like, this is what we're going to advocate for. I don't know if you are on social media, but when COVID happened in America, they mobilized pretty darn quickly. They were across the educational barriers. There were people that were fighting for access to education with COVID and to keep classes online. There were people who were fighting to allow people to continue working from home back in America. And it was very large groups, not like 100 or 200, with thousands of people together doing this. And I would hope that we would have that. But with that said, the support, the social support is much better here in Australia. Getting disability in America is practically like running your head into a wall repeatedly. You aren't really treated very well in terms of employment. One of the things that I struggled with here, and like my bosses still joke about it, I always apologize if I have to be off sick. And I'll always offer to do some sort of work, like, okay, I'm not feeling well today, but can I do some emails, or I'll work on this if I can? Because back home, being sick, you lose your job, you just get fired. They have FMLA, which is Family Medical Leave Act. However, what they don't talk about is performance managing. So if you were sick or disabled or had a problem, what they would do is they would pick apart your work. So things that, you know, you got away with every day or no one really cared about, they would start caring. So you weren't fired because you were disabled. You were fired because your performance dropped or your quality scores dropped. And that's because they're picking at you because they want you gone. And most employers there are at will as well. So at will means that they can fire you at will. They don't have to give you a reason or an explanation. They can just fire you. So I still have a lot of trauma from that, like a lot of trauma. Whenever I was underemployed for a very long time, because I would just take jobs that would accept me and be grateful that I had the job, and scared, you know, to change or look outside because it's like better the devil, you know, these people know that I'm sick if I go someplace new. But what I found is that a lot of employers in Australia are perfectly fine with it. I was shocked and amazed. I had one employer that I was only doing a contract for, and they put in automatic doors for me before I started for a 6-month contract. They did not have to amend their doors, but they did. My current job is, again, very understanding, and I work from home. So I'll say something like, I have a bit of a migraine now, but I'll hop on later. And they're like, no, you know, rest. And I always, for the longest, I thought it was a trick. I still sometimes get nervous and feel like it's a trick. Like, do you really mean that I should rest? When I had COVID, you know, I was out for almost a whole month. And again, anytime I spoke to somebody, it was like, oh, I hope you feel better soon. And it's a struggle. And I find a lot of Americans will say that that's one of the hardest things for them coming into Australia, because you come here with this idea that work is life. And if you aren't doing it, you're going to lose your job. And if you lose your job, there's no social support. You might get, what is it? I don't even remember. See, I don't even think about it enough that I can't remember unemployment. You might get unemployment payments, but those are limited. So you get them for, I think, 3 to 6 months as well. So people are just so nervous about it. And then you get here and you're off sick and they're like, yep, have a good time. You know, I hope you feel better. Yeah, I still feel like it's a trick.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting and good to hear. Yeah, it doesn't stop us, even though we have so much, the situation is so much better here than in the States. It doesn't stop us feeling terribly guilty, as you say. Even without that trauma, the trauma that you've experienced, and I still, having recently had this headache and had to take time off, you know, spent so much time worrying about the fact that I might lose this job or I might have to quit. I should quit because I'm not there. That was the words going through my head. And of course they were like, no, it's fine. Just do what you can.
Yeah, and I was taking jobs that I knew that I could do in my sleep, because if they were easier jobs and I got sick, then I could catch up a lot quicker versus jobs that were like on my level. Because I felt like if I had a job on my level and I got sick, it was going to be even worse. Like they were going to see that I wasn't good enough because of that. And again, not anything that I have experienced since I've started actually going for roles that match my capacity. And in fact, I've excelled in quite a few of them. So yeah, again, this is where I'm saying that employers really need to look at how they talk about disability. Like a lot of them will say stuff at the bottom of the job description, like we're an equal opportunity employer, we help you with reasonable accommodations, but they never really explain what those accommodations are. And I personally would feel comfortable if I saw in there like case studies, we have an employee here that has a wheelchair, and here's what we've done for this employee in a wheelchair. Help me understand what you mean by reasonable accommodations, because we never know. And reasonable accommodations to some is an insult to the others.
Yeah. And that is also the lack of connectedness and cohesiveness that you talked about in our disability community here in Australia, because I wish, that I had more visibility over other disabled workers in my workspace. It's a big place. It's a big university that I've got this job at. And so that I could, feel more confident in advocating for my access needs instead of just trying to fit in. Yeah.
And even help you see what other people have access so that you then know how to act accordingly. Because I use a lot of voice to text stuff, for example, and I only recently found out about that. That was something that I probably should have used years ago, but I didn't know about it. I didn't realize that I could ask for changes, variation in my hours, because people think of business hours as somewhere between 8:30 to 4:35. Whereas variations in hours is not abnormal depending on the type of job that you do. There's sometimes that I come into work a bit early, and then there's sometimes that I stay to work a little bit late. What I have done is started looking for task-based jobs where it's a project or a task that I need to complete versus something that's time-based, which means that I can work on those tasks at night if I have insomnia, so that I'm ahead of the game if I'm having a bit of a slow day during the day. Again, this is where I think that we need to be having these conversations among disabled people. How is it that you manage to have the jobs that you have? And what are the things that we can ask our employers for, but also to show employers that it's possible for us to work. We just might have to work a little bit differently. If you have a task that needs to be done and you want somebody to work 8 hours a day, why do they have to work 8 hours a day between these specific times if they don't need to call anybody specifically or be present at this time? What's to stop them from doing some of their work at 8 o'clock at night? If someone needs to take an hour off for a nap because they have a migraine, that shouldn't be theoretically a problem, because if they make that hour up later and the job is getting done to the high standards, that should not be a problem.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, we know that disabled people too have such great skills around problem solving and being creative, because we have to manage all the barriers and access problems in our lives. So we're actually really good at adapting and being flexible and doing the work we need to do, but doing it in a way we can. So yeah, that's something we don't value enough, I think. Yeah. Can I change tack slightly? And I want to know if you here in Australia, if I know that the disability scene, particularly sort of disability activist scene, is very not cohesive. But have you been able to connect with disabled people of colour? Or other sort of intersectional approaches, or has that been possible?
No, not really. And that's something that I would like to really get involved in. Nemo is the first person from the DRC that I've gotten to really talk to that's a disability advocate for person of color. And I'll add a bit of perspective to that. A lot of Black people already believe that we are seen as less than. And so a lot of them will not disclose disabilities. Disability is, I'm not going to say it's a dirty word in our community, but it's not something that a lot of people used to talk about, especially if you're at a certain age. I'm, like I said, 38. And so I remember, kids with ADHD or autism were automatically funneled into special classes in my community. And so a lot of the parents, if you had any issues, even diagnosed ones, did not want to engage in them. I was diagnosed with autism as an adult. And all the signs were there as a child, but my mom was never going to get me diagnosed, I don't think. I don't think she was ever going to look into that stuff. She acknowledged and accepted me for my differences. And that's one of the things that I love about my mom is while she was ableist, she also understood that I was different and I had different needs and allowed me within the safety of my home to be different. She didn't ask me to be anything but who I was, but in public we would have to mask. And that's different from neurodivergent masking. People of color, particularly immigrants, we have to be different people. How I talk now is not how I talk amongst Black people and my friends. We code switch. So there's two different levels there. There's code switching plus the neurodivergent masking, and we are exceptionally good at it, which is one of the reasons why we're not diagnosed neurodivergent as often as white people. They say that it's a white people disorder, but it's not really. A lot of us are just as neurodivergent. We just are really, really good at hiding it, and we call it code switching versus what it really is, masking. I would love to be more involved with people of color. I would love to be more involved with LGBT people, just to sort of, I guess, feel that connection. But I don't mind working with multiple different, like race is not important, but it would be something that I would like to meet more people like me here in Australia. Because when I'm back home and I can, have a meeting or meeting up on Zoom with the guys, it just feels good to see people like me making it through.
Yeah. Well, I might have to put you in touch with some people or give you some directions. But I think I'm going to ask that question because I think it shows another example of often I often talk about the disability community, and I think I do that because I want it to happen. I want it to be there, but it is there. There is disabled people everywhere, and I'm connected to Julie and lots of people, but and to you, Alison, too. But there isn't that sort of strong connection, and I hope to build that. I hope we get there. I should let Julie in. Julie, have you got a question burning for Alison? If you haven't, that's okay.
I haven't been writing things down because I've been quite intrigued and immersed in Alison's experiences and stories of the comparisons between the US and Australia, and I was really intrigued by the diagnosis happening, or some of the diagnosis happening in Australia compared to the US. So that was interesting. I have a really deep view of medicine in the US. So I think I watched too much drama. But and I hope that what I see isn't represented in everyday medicine in the US, because it seems to be medicine for the privileged.
It is. That's actually, I was going to say, American medical systems are actually really good if you have the privilege to access them. I was really lucky that my mom got a government job when I was a teenager. And so while we grew up relatively poor, the government job came with really good insurance. And I actually, sometimes when I think about it, I feel really bad because while I had cancer, my mom finally got her bachelor's degree in teaching, but she couldn't leave because she needed to keep that government insurance to make sure that I was covered and taken care of. And even then there were still co-pays, but I still had really, really good care when I really needed it. But we joke about it, and those bills, if we had paid out of pocket, would have been something like $3 or $4 million. My care was over a period of 3 years. So I pretty much lived in the hospital for about 2 years. And then the third year was a lot of outpatient. And what I found coming here to Australia is that you have so much access no matter who you are, but it's still segregated to some degree. I use a lot of private doctors because I can afford the private doctors. And that means that I get a faster and better quality of care. I don't think I've deteriorated in some ways that I've seen other people in America deteriorate because I have access to care and I have access to ancillary care, also medications. Some of the medications that I take are $38 for several months supply, where they're about $700 back home in America. So yeah, America has amazing programs like the Mayo Clinic, and they have programs for people with POTS and chronic fatigue that you can go inpatient, but you have to be able to afford them. Whereas here in Australia, um, everything is separate. I think that that's the hardest part, and the biggest difference is that everything here is separate. I go to one hospital for my cancer, like I go to Peter Mac for anything to do with like my post-cancer treatment, or my hematologist. I have to go to the women's for my eye and ear hospital. I go to 3 different hospitals. The migraine clinic is across town, and then I have my cardiologist clinic that I go to. And yeah, most of my diagnoses came here because back home in America, I just simply could not afford to even investigate things. And like I said, there was that period after I finished chemotherapy and moved here that I actually thought that I was healthy. I had about 5 good years of, the occasional cold, and I thought that that was the end of everything until the POTS picked up in 2015.
Mm. I want to just highlight for our viewers too. We were talking before about employment and the difficulties, or the extra layer that comes with working in America, and how that desperate needing to hang on to your job. And one of the reasons why people in America desperately want to hang on to their job is for the insurance, because jobs come, that's how you get your health insurance, unless you pay lots of money, is it comes with certain types of jobs. That's just something we don't have here. So I thought I'd just explain that.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the more amazing things. I feel like I've been able to do so much better for myself here in Australia in terms of working, because I can take another job or a new job or look into other opportunities without being concerned about my insurance. And like when I got divorced, my mom kept asking whether or not I was going to come home, and I considered it seriously. I mean, I miss my family and everything like that. But one of the hardest decisions, or the hardest things to think about, is the fact that if I go back home to America and I get sick, I'm at the mercy of their system. Where here I'm in a system that proactively helps me be the best. It's not perfect, don't get me wrong, but I'm not going to, die from the flu here in Australia. It's whereas people back home do. And a lot of people don't realize that they're sick. Like I actually didn't realize that I had leukemia for a long time because I was hesitant to go to the doctors. And we just thought it was the flu until it got really, really bad. So yeah, I think that that's the major difference. And I love Australia for that. And I will die on this hill that universal healthcare is the best thing that ever happened to me.
We're getting close to the end. I have one more thing I wanted to talk about, and that is, you made mention before of Belong, and that's how we know each other. I think we've talked about Belong here on this program, but it was quite a long time ago, I think earlier this year. So Alison, would you like to tell us a bit about Belong?
Belong is just a group of disabled people having all kinds of discussions. Like it's evolved since I've joined it. It went from sort of a once a week to where we're having conversations about the pain and the things that you can't talk about mainstreams. We have afternoon meetings. We now have in-person meetings, which is good. I haven't been able to make it to one yet, but I hope to soon. We've had now a meetup, which I enjoyed. I really love Belong because I felt a bit lost here in Australia as a disabled person. As a worker, as a student, all of that, I felt like I was connected, but I didn't really know disabled people here in Australia. And you can't really walk up to random people and be like, hi, you look disabled, let's be friends. So I've now found my people through Belong. And I really hope that it gets bigger and we get more and more of these programs, because it's life-changing. It's where I found people that I can talk to, that I can vent to, that understand. Like the same thing that I said with the leukemia chat when I was younger. Finding people that understand what you're going through is very important.
Yeah. So the Belong network, anybody with a disability is able to join it. We have a short induction session, and then we run online meetups several times a week, in person, evening, daytime. Some have themes. There's a sort of a campaigning one. There's our favourite, Alison and mine's favourite, is the Pain and Yuck group, where we just talk about the pain and the yuck. And it's so liberating because most of the time we're not allowed to talk about that stuff. And yeah, so if any of our listeners are interested in connecting, and there's no obligation, you don't have to show up. It's all by invitation. So if you are interested, you can always Google the Belong Network or contact the Disability Resources Centre. We may even put a link in the notes. That sounds so professional when I say that.
And do that, and we can do that. And if anyone needs more information, you can, or topics that you'd like us to explore, just give us a email on yourlifeyourvoice@gmail.com. Also, we do often put links to topics that were covered on the session. We'll often put links on our website, so that's another way to get more information. And on that note, I'd like to say this is our last session for 2023. So we've had a very successful year this year. I'd like to thank Larissa McFarlane and Anthony Recco, my dream team, that we support each other through this crazy world of YouTubing and Your Life, Your Voice. So thank you to both my co-hosts. They've been really supportive of me when I haven't been so well. And I think that we support each other well. So on that note, we'll see you again in 2024. Bye now.
Well, just before we go, just before you do that, I just want to say big thanks to Alison for being our guest today, for giving us so much of her energy and time and her wisdom. Thanks heaps.
No worries. Thank you, guys.
Yes, Alison, it was a rather interesting interview because of the different cultures and along like different countries and the experiences that you have experienced, and the comparisons in countries. So thank you very much for your insights.
You're welcome.
Bye now.
Catch us on Your Life, Your Voice channel fortnightly or on demand.
We would like your comments and suggestions on topics you would like us to explore. Leave your comments on the YouTube comments section.
Diversity and Disability is a program of the Migrant Resource Centre Northwest Region Incorporated.
And we'd like to thank the management for funding this program and channel.
Phone number 1300 676 044.
Please feel free to email us on dndyourlifeyourvoice@gmail.com or contact us via the Migrant Resource Centre Northwest Region Incorporated.